Hey guys, it's Aegis here, and in this tutorial I'm going to cover some of the basics of 3v3 gameplay. First, I'm going to talk a bit about how to make the decision whether you should play 1v1, 2v2, or 3v3, and then I'll cover some tips on how to put together a lineup to play 3v3, and then I'll finish off with some in-battle tactics that you can use and how 3v3 is separate from 3 individual 1v1 matches. First off, you've got to decide what's the right level for you to play. This is going to depend a lot on the items you have, the fusion of those items, and basically whether you can put together 1, 2, or 3 battle-worthy mechs at the same time. The mistake I see a lot of newer players making is wanting to play 3v3 but not being able to put together a competent second or third mech. This puts you at a big disadvantage, not only against top players but against all other players. If your second and third mechs aren't fused at all, you should probably consider playing 1v1 where your fused mech is going to have better chances. That being said, if you've got good fusion across lots of different items, especially 3 different torsos, 3v3 is a lot of fun. There's a lot more tactics that you can employ and a lot more varied gameplay. Once you've decided to play 3v3, you've got to set your lineup. And it's a little bit more complicated than just setting 3 individual mechs. You've got additional considerations like what happens when one mech gets destroyed and the next one comes on. To help address this, you want to have mechs that seamlessly pass the baton from one to the other. That means that the general attacking ranges of these mechs have to play from one mech to the next. So as you can see here, the first mech in my lineup is an energy mech. What often happens with these energy mechs is that you start off at long range using your supernova to drain your opponent's energy, and you finish the match close together using your grappling hook or teleport and sword. Oftentimes when you finish an opponent's mech, or he finishes yours, you're going to be at range 2. So for that reason, the next mech in my lineup is one that can fight effectively at range 2. This heat mech has a lot of hit points, so that if I'm up against a physical mech and I have to take a couple of shots at close range, it's got the hit points to withstand it until I can get my drone and shield up and get the opponent out of the way. Then with this mech, what you're going to tend to focus on is pushing the opponent back with your firewall, draining him with your resistance drainer, pulling him back in with your grenade launcher, and your general attacking weapon is going to be your heat dissolver. For that reason, this mech is often going to end up at range 3 or 4. Therefore, my last mech is a double needle blaster mech. It covers range 2, 3, 4 very effectively, and it also has some good tactics at range 5 and even range 6 because of the orb cannon. So one big consideration when putting together your lineup is that passing of the baton. The fighting ranges of your mechs should hand off from one to the other. So if you have a mech that attacks at close range, and then you have one that attacks at long range, in the middle, you're probably going to want a mech that's really good at pushing the mechs back into that long range. That way, there's a logical progression as you go through your mechs. The next consideration is damage types. One thing that you want to try to avoid is having 2 mechs back to back that have the same damage type. And the reason for that is that if your opponent has used a resistance kit on one of his mechs, when you switch from one to the other, he still has the benefit of that resistance kit against your next mech. So it's good to try to switch damage types between your mechs. And that doesn't mean you have to use 1 energy, 1 heat, and 1 physical. But it's probably better to try to go from heat to physical to heat than heat to physical. These are just some general guidelines in putting together your lineup. If you've got 3 strong mechs and you try to follow those as best you can, you're going to put together a solid 3v3 lineup. The last thing I want to cover is in-battle tactics. And specifically, the only thing that really separates 3v3 from, say, 1v1 is the ability to switch between your different mechs. You want to think long and hard about doing this, though. Action points are about the most important resource that you have in a battle. You only get 2 of them every turn. So it has to be really in your benefit before you consider giving one up to switch your mechs. If you have a matchup that's very lopsided against you, it's probably a no-brainer and you should go ahead and switch. But keep in mind that if your opponent has a good counter for every one of the mechs that you do switch to, you might switch to your second, he might switch to his, you'll switch to your third, he'll switch to his, and now you're stuck with a matchup that you still don't like. If you switch back to your first mech, he's going to switch back to his, and now nobody can switch their mechs anymore. So you're stuck with that matchup you didn't like, and you wasted some action points along the way. Now, another consideration where switching mechs might be a really good idea is if you have destroyed your opponent's mech, and your current mech, your first one, has low hit points. And the reason your first one is where it's important is because after your opponent destroys your first mech, he gets a bonus to damage, same as you do against him, for the rest of the match. Therefore, if you destroy his first mech, you don't have any good attacks left where you can do some big damage to his second mech, and your first mech is low on hit points, now might be a good time to consider switching your mechs, getting ready with your second mech against his second mech, and avoiding him getting that extra damage bonus for as long as possible. This is really going to add up in your favor over the length of the match. So that about sums it up. If you follow these tips, make sure you've got 3 good mechs, make sure they work well together and pass the baton between one another seamlessly, and only switch your mechs when it's really in your benefit to do so, I think you're going to find you have really good success at 3v3. Good luck, pilots.